1 in 4 children today are lacking in vitamin D. Not a surprise, you might think, since we don't have an abundance of sunshine in this country.
But what is vitamin D and what can we do to help our kids? Here with all the answers is Helena Scully, the researcher behind the study with the Mercer Institute on Aging. Good morning, you're very welcome to chat to us. Good morning. Now, I have to say, it's one of those things that just before we came on air when we were talking about it, I was very aware within the first 12 months of a child's life. But then after that, it kind of got lost on me, and I think that maybe they are. I'm wondering now, do we fall into your study? So first things first, what is vitamin D and why do our children need it so much?
Yeah, so vitamin D is a hormone. It's actually quite unique as a vitamin because it's the only one that we can make from the sun. Okay. So that's why a lot of people would probably know it as the sunshine vitamin. So it is unique in that way because we get about 90% of our sources from the sunlight. But as you know, in Ireland, we're quite lacking in the sunlight and we can't make any vitamin D between October and March. So it's because of that that a lot of people are quite low in vitamin D.
Yeah, when you think of vitamin D, I mean, I think of Dickensian times, rickets, all these things, but what is it actively used for in the body?
So it's really important for absorbing calcium from your diet. So because of this, it's really important for your bone health. So that's why you see children who don't get enough calcium and vitamin D, they end up with rickets. And it's something that we're seeing on the increase in Ireland and in the UK. So it is really, really important for your bone health, and particularly during childhood and adolescence, where you're putting on that bone mass for the rest of your life. So basically, if you don't reach the highest levels you can when you're, in your late teens, early 20s, it means that when you get much older, you're more likely to get brittle bone disease. It's called osteoporosis.
So you really need to have the building blocks in place from an early age, so you won't have things like osteoporosis, maybe prone to arthritis, etc. when you're older. Vitamin D, it's fat soluble, isn't it?
That's it.
So 88 K is fat soluble. So you can actually supplement. We're not just depending on the sunlight to get it. So what foods are good for it, and obviously how much of a supplement do you need to take if it does need to be included on that in your diet?
Yeah, so the Irish diet is kind of quite naturally low in sources that are high in vitamin D. So these are things like your oily fish, your salmon, your mackerel, your herring, egg yolk, and even mushrooms. So if you stick your mushrooms out in the windowsill, that ones you get from the shop, stick them out in the windowsill, they'll actually make vitamin D as well. Yeah, exactly.
I thought mushrooms weren't good for anything except flavour. That's mad.
That's it. But a lot of people don't eat these food sources.
The kids especially are.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's quite hard to get oily fish into kids. I know myself. But so that's where people can rely on things like supplements, to get the daily dose. So you recommend for children, everyone between the age of 5 to 65 should get about 10 micrograms of vitamin D a day between their food and their supplement sources.
Is there more just in terms of the study did you find? So in girls or boys, are girls or boys more deficit? Is it a gender thing at all, or is it just down to maybe the socio-economic background, or what are you finding?
Yeah, so we found 3 things from the study. The first was that girls were more likely to be deficient than boys, and we think that's down to, girls are more likely to be vegan or vegetarian. They're less likely to be out in the sun as much as boys are, because boys, when they go out, they're less likely to cover up, they're less likely to have sun cream on, things like this. So because of that, we're finding that girls were actually more at risk. And then we also found that teens, so children that were over 12, were also more likely to have low levels, and this is because they're less likely to get fortified foods in their diet, so things like their cereals, their milks. It's really important to kind of focus on these sources, and they're also less likely to take supplements. And then we also found that children in the lower socioeconomic areas, they were much more likely to be vitamin D deficient. So overall, we found that about 1 in 4 children had low vitamin D, but this actually increased to 1 in 3 when you looked at the children from the low socioeconomic areas.
When you look at the gender thing as well, because boys and girls, if you know yourself, boys tend, not generalising it, but they tend to be team sports more. Their soccer, their football, their hurling, their rugby, they're out in the air, and that would be more prevalent there. But as well as that, talk to me about sunscreen, because I know if you think vitamin D, we need to get it. Don't bother putting on sunscreen if the sun is out because I need a vitamin D. That's not what we should do either, because we need a bit of clarification on that, because you have to balance the health risks here as well.
That's it. So like I mentioned, you can only get vitamin D from the sun between March and October, okay? So kind of during the summer months, that's the prime time to get vitamin D from the sun. But unfortunately, anything like clothing, the clouds, sun cream, as you mentioned, anything like that will affect the amount of vitamin D that you can make. So, obviously it's important to protect your skin in terms of skin cancer and this, but, it takes about 15 minutes for vitamin D to be made once your hands, your face, and your arms are exposed. So if you can put on your sun cream, it takes about 15 minutes for that to activate. So if you go out into the sun straight away, within that 15-minute window, you should be making some vitamin D for the day.
Can you store vitamin C?
I was trying to ask. Yeah, so you can store vitamin D, and a lot of the time we see that people, they go on holidays over the summer, and they'll have their whole body exposed for a week or 2 weeks, and they'll actually make a good few months worth of vitamin D in that time. So that's why you kind of see it's after the summer, it's coming into the spring, into the winter, that people are starting to get lower levels of vitamin D. So you can store it in the body, but it's just important to make sure that you are getting some sources in your diet, you are getting a bit of sunshine to avoid getting deficient.
And what else does it do apart from helping your bone health? Because you mentioned holidays, people go on holidays, they feel great, that they feel full of energy. Could that be just a vitamin D boost?
Yeah, so we know that having low levels of vitamin D can cause things like fatigue and muscle aches and pains. So these are just kind of the low level symptoms that we find of deficiency, and then obviously the longer you have deficiency, the more serious consequences you're going to get down the line, such as you're more likely to fall and break a bone when you're older. So these are just some of the small things. We also know that vitamin D is good for preventing respiratory infections. So there was a lot of talk of it over COVID, obviously.
That's right, hyper supplement.
That's it. Yeah. So we do know that having low levels, maintaining your levels of vitamin D can help prevent respiratory infections, and particularly in children, it's been linked to preventing asthma, heart disease, diabetes later on in life by making sure you have good levels when you're younger.
We need to
supplement ourselves. We're not getting enough sun in this country.
So we're going to the pharmacy, we're like, is there vitamin D in that? That's brilliant. Thank you so much for coming in and chatting to us. Very interesting.
Thank you for joining us this morning. Now we'll take a quick break. Stay with us. We're live until midday.